on the ruling class who, through sleight of hand, fractional reserve banking, own much of the planet and now want what little bits of wealth are left from the American people who are their ancestral enemies. Pat Carmack is our guest, the maker of the film, and Bill Still, the narrator. It's available at Infowars.com. Recapping for some stations that I know have just joined us or listeners, Pat Carmack, of course, has been a banker, been involved in business, been involved in oil, been involved in utilities, found out about the real monetary system decades ago, and is now one of the leading experts on it. And Bill Still, of course, was a newspaper editor, found out about all this when a reader sent him some information, and he researched it. That started his journey. So many of us started out on our journeys that way. Somebody challenged us with some information. We think it's bull. We look into it, and we find out that it's not bull. It's the real world. I know we got some callers that are off topic, and I'm going to get to you regardless, but I know John, George, Kyle, and others, Mike and others are for the guests. So let's get some of those calls out of the way, and then we're going to get into whatever issues our guests want to discuss on monetary system, what we're facing, how it works, and their solution, which I think is the best I've seen out there, bar none. I don't just toot people's horns unless I really believe it. And it looked good to me 12 years ago, 13 years ago when I first saw it. Now that I know so much more and have interviewed so many experts, it seems like the only way out. Now, because the bankers are going to bankrupt us and then always offer another solution that gets you deeper into their control. That's why we have to identify them. That's why we have to fight them. You can't just ignore this. This affects you whether you mow lawns for a living or you're a rocket scientist. Let's go ahead and talk to John in Ohio. You're on the guest with the folks from the Money Masters.
Yes, this comment is related, but it also branches off into your previous guest. I think it would be interesting to have Webster Tarpley on, because I think he offers a genuinely populist, genuine leftist point of view.
He's on next week.
Well, that's great, because I think he has more than just the calls for austerity, cutbacks on the social spending, which, the safety net programs. And this kind of...
well, the bankers only offered that to get us under their control and domesticate us. Now they're taking it away from the hogs because it's time for slaughter.
Right, but I'm saying under these conditions, austerity and cutback would be the hard landing that we all want to avoid. And I also wanted to point out that I believe that as we head into this mad war that these neocons want to bring us into, I think people like Jerome Corsi are really two-faced ponies, because I've heard him recently and over the years constantly pushing all of the kind of ultra neocon scaremongering about terrorism that got us into the war into Iraq. And just about a month ago on Coast to Coast, he jointly with the host was talking about Iran possibly giving terrorist nuclear bombs to plant here, and he's organizing actual some of these people that he calls freedom fighters that you obviously show are nothing but CI-run terrorists, Al-Qaeda type terrorists. This man is connected, I'm absolutely certain, to the secret agents of the government, and he talks differently depending on who he's with. And
we bring on serious guests, and we just want to get his info on Obama. We're obviously going to be exposing McCain. It really makes no difference, and I appreciate your call, John. What about what he just brought up, Pat and Bill? The first part of his comment about, I guess that brings us to your solutions. What the bankers are offering, where does that lead us versus what you're saying?
Well, actually, they don't offer a solution. It's just more of the same. What we've got right now is, our deficit's running over $400 billion a year. That's roughly the amount we pay on interest to the national debt. And so this gentleman was talking about a soft landing and so on versus austerity and everybody cutting back and so forth. Well, the problem is we're paying $400 billion a year to the bankers. And what we have to do is to reform the system so we no longer do that. Put very simply, we simply need to repeal the Federal Reserve Act, and rather than borrowing the money the government needs to spend, the government needs to create it itself. The principal objection to that is it would cause hyperinflation. That's certainly true. So another law has to pass at the same time that raises the reserve requirements in banks from 10% to 100%. at the same time period that we're paying off the national debt.
And by the way, people love to say, you mean our government issues the money? That's how it's supposed to work. Instead of having private banks essentially be the government, now with their new fake carbon tax credit, the central banks want us to buy our carbon credits from them, literally taxing breathing.
Right.
Well, if I could quote Lincoln on that, quote, the government should create, issue, and circulate all the currency and credit needed to satisfy the spending power of the government and the buying power of consumers. The privilege of creating and issuing money is not only the supreme prerogative of government, but it is the government's greatest creative opportunity, close quote, Abraham Lincoln.
Yeah, but they've taken that engine of creativity and empowering people and turned it into an agent of feudalism and criminal consolidation of wealth. Go ahead, Pat.
Well, precisely, because rather than the U.S. government having that power, which is appropriate to the sovereign power, by the Federal Reserve Act, they've got Congress to delegate it to private banks. It's the very banks we were talking about, the ones that own the Federal Reserve. So those banks make our money. They create it, and so wealth's being transferred to them at an extremely rapid rate. And to solve this economic problem we have, we simply have to repeal the Federal Reserve Act, or so reform it that power is restored to the government. And that can be done. It does not result in any economic hardship. In fact, to the contrary, rather than having a recession or a depression, it would restore us to economic stability really overnight, because it's simply the functioning of the present system that's creating this problem we're in.
Absolutely. Anything else on that subject, Bill?
Well, I can give a Jefferson quote. I wish it were possible to obtain a single amendment to our Constitution, taking from the federal government the power of borrowing.
Absolutely. Let's take another monetary comment or question. Let's talk to Mike in Louisiana, then Kyle. Mike, you're on the air.
Hello, guys. I apologize that this question is not particularly monetary.
It doesn't matter. Just go ahead.
When the people try to stand up against this tyranny, I heard last week a caller call in about a website, awrm.org, I believe it was. I don't have a computer, but my understanding was that there is in place legislation or some kind of whatever to go after the citizen militias and bring them before tribunals and such as that. Can you speak to that?
Well, one of the things that's happened good lately is, of course, you're probably familiar with the Supreme Court ruling with respect to owning firearms at home. Are you familiar with that just happened?
Yes.
Upholding the Second Amendment?
Yes, that also, after Katrina, I think they passed legislation here in Louisiana that they couldn't confiscate firearms during a national emergency. My question particularly is, last week somebody called in and I think he said he was active duty or something.
Well, sir, we just covered a bill earlier about the Homegrown Extremist Act, where they want to monitor and try to restrict free speech. But the government is a pack of criminals. They're illegitimate. So, no, I'm not aware of that, so I appreciate your call. Let's go ahead and talk to Kyle in Iowa. You're on the air.
Hi, I wanted to make an observation, if I could, about hyperinflation and what that could mean for gold, and just tell me if I'm wrong if I am, but I've been studying hyperinflation and, like in the Weimar Republic and in Hungary and so forth, when, prices were doubling, like literally overnight. In a situation where you're already currently holding gold, if your debt is in dollars and, say, the dollar is devalued to like a millionth of its original, or to what the value is now, or whatever, couldn't you then, in turn, assuming you're able to hold on long enough, actually pay your debt off for, pennies on the dollar.
Yeah, don't get confused. They're against a gold or silver-backed currency because then it can be manipulated because the bad guys hold the majority of it. I don't think our guest, and we'll hear it from them in a minute, I wouldn't imagine, because I agree with them on other issues, they seem very intelligent and informed. We're not saying gold and silver is a bad investment or a bad hedge against inflation.
Right, I wasn't going there either. So.
Okay, good. So what is your question?
Well, the point is I guess I just want to get, is my interpretation of this correct? Is that a possibility where, say I bought gold at $6.50 an ounce, or $6.50 an ounce, which I did. Say if we do get into a situation like that, because the most I've heard you guys say is like $5,000 an ounce for gold. Now, is that a...
Well, that's Bloomberg. Bloomberg was saying that. I couldn't imagine it going to that. I mean, if that happens, it means they're going to devalue the dollar to nothing.